the fire methods history used that modern survival ignores. Before getting into this, subscribe if you care about survival knowledge that comes from centuries of trial, error, and loss, rather than modern trends. Fire has always been treated as a miracle solution in survival culture, but history tells a far more cautious and disciplined story. Most people today are taught how to start a fire. Soldiers, explorers, and displaced civilians were taught when not to, how little fire they could get away with, and how to extract heat without flame at all. Modern survival advice treats fire as the first priority. History treated it as a calculated risk. For most of human conflict and movement, open fire was dangerous. It revealed position, consumed energy, attracted attention, and required fuel that was rarely abundant. Armies learned quickly that uncontrolled fire caused more problems than it solved. As a result, historical fire methods focused less on ignition and more on control, concealment, and efficiency. So, one of the most common historical methods was ember management rather than keeping a constant flame going. Soldiers and civilians alike would carry live embers wrapped in cloth, fungus, or bark. This clever practice allowed them to preserve heat and ignition capability without the need to repeatedly build visible fires. You see, a glowing coal produces almost no light and very little smoke compared to an open flame. This was a widespread tradition across Europe, Asia, and indigenous cultures, long before matches ever existed. Interestingly, modern survival techniques largely ignore ember transport, even though it's, honestly, one of the lowest risk ways to maintain fire capability over time. Another method that history relied on was reflected heat rather than direct flame. Instead of sitting over fires, people would position stones, earth walls, logs, or even trench sides to absorb heat and radiate it back slowly. This approach allowed folks to stay warm without needing large flames. In wartime camps, soldiers often built small fires behind earthworks or inside dugouts where heat was captured and light was concealed. It's interesting how modern advice often encourages bigger fires for comfort, but that really ignores the fact that reflected heat produces warmth with far less fuel and, much less exposure. Fuel preparation actually mattered more than ignition. Historical accounts, time and again, show that experienced soldiers spent much more time drying, splitting and staging their fuel than they did actually lighting fires. Wet wood was dried near the body, sometimes inside clothing, or tucked under shelter long before anyone even tried to light it. Kindling was always prepared in advance and carefully protected from any moisture. These days, modern survival often treats fire as if it's just a spontaneous act, rather than a process that really begins hours earlier. But history understood very clearly that a fire built too quickly is usually a fire that fails. Low oxygen fires were honestly another overlooked method. Instead of those roaring flames we often imagine, historical fires were often smothered just a bit to reduce smoke and light while still producing heat. Charcoal beds, trench fires, and pit fires were all designed to burn slowly and, almost invisibly. This approach mattered not only for concealment from enemies, but also for reducing carbon monoxide buildup in enclosed spaces. Yet, modern survival videos frequently glorify large flames, even though real historical firecraft was all about restraint. Fire was also used indirectly through heated objects. Stones, for example, were heated and then placed near sleeping areas. Water was warmed and used as a kind of thermal mass. Soil was even heated beneath shelters. All these methods transferred heat without needing a sustained flame. Soldiers in cold environments would often heat rocks and place them under bedding or even inside packs to provide warmth through the night. This approach really reduced the need for a continuous fire and allowed for rest without exposure. Modern survival advice does mention this from time to time, but rarely emphasizes just how central it was, historically speaking. Another ignored method was shared fire responsibility. In military and civilian groups, one fire served many. People rotated warming periods, dried clothing communally, and extinguished fires aggressively once their purpose was fulfilled. Fire was not entertainment or ambiance. It was a resource that was used, then shut down. Modern solo survival narratives often ignore how group-based fire management dramatically reduces risk and fuel consumption. History also relied heavily on fire substitutes. Body heat, insulation, wind control, and ground separation were prioritized before fire was ever lit. Soldiers were trained to stay warm without fire whenever possible because fire could not always be used. This meant better layering discipline, movement management, and shelter construction. Fire was supplemental, not foundational. Modern survival reverses this hierarchy, teaching fire first and everything else second. Perhaps the most important lesson history teaches is that fire attracts problems. Smoke signals position. Light draws attention. Flames require guarding. Countless historical casualties occurred because fires revealed camps or distracted soldiers during critical moments. As a result, experienced troops treated fire with suspicion. They used it briefly, deliberately, and often reluctantly. Modern survival culture treats fire as reassuring rather than risky, which leads to dangerous habits in real-world scenarios. Applying these historical lessons today means rethinking fire entirely. Instead of asking how fast you can light a fire, ask how long you can avoid needing one. Prepare fuel before ignition. Learn ember preservation. Practice reflected heat methods. Use fire to charge thermal mass rather than to stay constantly burning. Most importantly, treat fire as a tactical decision, not a comfort reflex. History did not ignore fire. It mastered it by limiting it. That lesson has largely been lost, replaced by dramatic flames and fast ignition tricks that look impressive but solve only part of the problem. If this kind of grounded, uncomfortable truth is what you come here for, subscribe to Strange History and share this with anyone who believes survival starts with sparks instead of discipline. Fire has always been powerful, but history shows restraint was what kept people alive.